We're now joined by recurring guest on the podcast, Mike Carmin, who contributes to On3 Sports at the goldandblack.com. Mike, how are you doing today? Getting ready to talk some Syracuse and Purdue coming up this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call me a recurring guest. One time, I don't know
Well,
if
this
that.
is the second time, so it would be recurring.
I'm a repeat offender. We can go that direction.
Sure, we can go that direction. The Orange and the Boilermakers getting set to go for the second straight season coming up on Saturday. But I want to go back to last year's matchup. I remember you were there. I was there in the Dome to witness that game. One of the craziest football games, is one of the craziest fourth quarters, especially that I've ever seen. Let's go back. Where does that game rank in terms of games you've watched in person, in terms of everything that happened down the stretch?
Well, from Purdue's standpoint, it was probably the most disappointing game that they've had in a long time because they fought back. They had some opportunities to close it out. They didn't do it. I can't remember the number of unsportsmanlike penalties that were called in that game.
Too many to count.
Right. So it was a bizarre and weird game. Someone had mentioned to me last weekend that, Syracuse stole the game. I'm like, no, you can't steal something when it's given to you. And I feel like Purdue kind of gave Syracuse the game. They made some plays down the stretch and all that kind of stuff, but Purdue was its own enemy in that game. And to fall behind like they did and then battle all the way back, I really thought that loss would linger with them and be something that would hold them back. But they went on to win the Big Ten West. They did win the next week, barely, against Florida Atlantic. So it didn't have a long-term effect like I thought it would, but it was not a good finish for Purdue or a good look for Purdue last year in the Dome.
You mentioned obviously the matchup last year. There's a lot new with Purdue this year. New coaching staff, Ryan Walters, and as head coach, Hudson Card, quarterback, O'Connell gone. What is the transition like been from last year to this year with the new Purdue squad?
Well, just the history of Purdue football is the Credo quarterbacks throwing the ball, Drew Brees, Kyle Orton, so on and so forth. And then when Jeff Brom left for Louisville, they went a different direction. They went with a defensive coach, a first-year head coach. He had not been a head coach before. He's 37 years old. So they kind of went in a different direction a little bit. But he's hired assistants around him. Graham Harrell brings the air raid offense. So a lot of what Purdue has traditionally done over the years kind of remains intact, just with a new wrinkle. They have a lot of new faces on the sideline, a lot of new faces on the roster. That's kind of the way college football is going to operate now with the transfer portal. And, I think they have a good quarterback in Hudson Card. He's a dual threat type of guy. And we've seen his arm on display the first 2 weeks. Last week, his legs really, I think, helped win that game for them. So he's kind of the marquee guy of the transfers that came in. But they have a whole host of other new faces that they're trying to work in and blend together. And I think that has taken time. I think you saw that in the first game against Fresno. The offensive line really hadn't played together. They were better last week. I think they can get better as the season goes on. But that's the challenge of bringing together a lot of new faces in a short period of time to get them to work together. You don't have 30 games to get it right like in basketball season. You have 12. And you really have to get it going in September to have success in October and November.
So with all this change, I feel like the question that keeps coming to mind from at least an outsider's perspective is, why did all this change occur? It felt like, the Jeff Brom to Louisville rumors were something that had been building up over time. Was it expected after last year when Purdue, as you mentioned, was playing in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, that after 2022 would be the year that Jeff Brom would depart because of, outgoing players on the roster like an Aiden O'Connell, like a Charlie Jones, like a Payne Durham? I guess, why did all this change occur?
Well, because Louisville had an opening, and Satterfield wasn't going to get a contract extension from Louisville. So Louisville, kind of made it clear that they didn't want him anymore. So he moved on. And once he moved on, that opened the door for Jeff Brom to finally go to Louisville. A few years ago, I think after his second year at Purdue, the Louisville job was open. He flirted with it. He got a nice raise and contract extension out of Purdue, and Purdue did the right thing at that time because their program was just trying to get back on track and to start over again with the portal starting to come into play. It would have been a huge step back for the program. But once the Louisville job opened, everybody knew Jeff Brom was going to leave. There's no animosity toward it. I mean, everybody understands he wants to go home and coach his hometown team. That's fine. So that's kind of why that all happened. And Purdue was not going to counter anything. Jeff Brom was successful at Purdue. I think he had a successful run, 4 bowl games, Big Ten West, NFL talent. He brought in with Rondell Moore, David Bell, and some other guys. Aiden O'Connell, he helped develop. So it was a successful run, but just the timing of everything kind of opened the door for him to go back to Louisville.
You mentioned the bowl games and representing the West in the Big Ten championship game last year. Going to this year, obviously the loss in the opener against Fresno State. You guys beat Virginia Tech last week. Where does Purdue now stand this year in the Big Ten?
It's a difficult question to answer 2 weeks in because they haven't played a Big Ten team. There have been some Big Ten games, and where they fall in the pecking order, I'm not sure yet. When you look at the Big Ten West, Wisconsin, they got beat by Washington State last week. Iowa's always Iowa. Illinois seems to be struggling out of the gate. In part, Ryan Walters came from Illinois to Purdue, so I think that's playing a role. I really don't know where Purdue fits in the Big Ten West right now because we're still trying to figure out, these teams and who they're going to be. We'll get a better idea next week. They play Wisconsin at home on a Friday night, and then they host Illinois. So by the end of September, I think everyone will have not a clear picture, but an idea of where all these teams kind of fit together. It's with the Big Ten West, and I know your fans probably don't follow it that closely, but it's been Wisconsin and Iowa winning that division, but it's always been tightly contested and compact standings. And I think it's probably headed that direction again. Purdue has some questions to answer if they can compete for the West title. And over the next couple weeks, we'll see if they can answer some of those questions, and maybe have a chance to compete for that title again.
How worrying was the loss to Fresno when it comes to saying, maybe Purdue does not have a chance to compete for that Big Ten West title this year because they lost their opening game of the season to a Mountain West team and then barely escaped against a Virginia Tech team that people think is going to be at the bottom of the ACC?
Well, first of all, they were not Big Ten games, so I don't know how much it will hurt them. The Fresno State game looked like a team that had a lot of new faces. They had a new coach on the sideline. A lot of inexperience came out that game, and you were playing a Fresno State team that had won, 6 or 7 in a row to end last season. Jeff Tedford is kind of a quarterback whisperer. He brought in a transfer guy that he had coached up, and they really just kind of picked apart Purdue's defense and found the seams, found the holes, and were able to move the ball. So, I don't. It was a difficult loss because you're at home. You're a Big Ten team. You're perceived to win that game. It didn't happen. If Purdue was sitting here 0-2, I think there would be a lot of concerns about what you can make out of this season based on the schedule that's coming up. But the fact that they got the win, and now this is the start of a 3-game homestand where they have Syracuse, Wisconsin, and Illinois to close out the month, they have a chance to really piece some things together before the meat of their schedule with Ohio State and Michigan in October and November, Minnesota, going to Nebraska, all those games. They need to make they need to get some wins here this month to kind of lessen what may happen in October and November to put themselves in a position to compete for the title, but also try to get to a bowl game.
Someone that would be crucial for getting those wins would be quarterback Hudson Card, transferring over from Texas, a former highly touted prospect coming out of high school. If you're these other teams and you're looking at a scouting report, what are Hudson Card's strengths and what are his weaknesses?
Well, I thought last week he executed the zone read really well. He made really good decisions on when to keep it and when to hand it off to Devin Mockabee. And I don't know if you guys remember, Devin Mockabee kind of started his ascent last year in the Syracuse game. He started getting more carries and worked his way into the number one running back spot. But I thought Hudson did a better job in the running game. They had more designed runs for him, as opposed to the first week. I don't think there were a lot of designs runs for him. A lot of his running in the first week were on scrambles. When things were not open. I think he has a strong arm. The issue with Purdue, unlike with Jeff Brom, they really don't have that star power at wide receiver. Now, the fastest guy on the team is Deion Burks, and if he gets behind a defense, you're not going to catch him. But he's not David Bell. He's not Rondell Moore. He's not that kind of level of receiver yet. And Hudson Card has to elevate the receivers to potentially what his level can be. I think he's got a chance down the line to have a shot at the NFL. And whether that happens, we don't know yet, but he has to raise the level of play with everyone else. And his tight end, his best tight end hasn't played a lot. He played a few snaps against Virginia Tech with Garrett Miller, but he's got a good arm, good legs. I would expect them to run the ball a little bit more with him this week again, because it worked pretty well last week. I think they'll try to stick with that if they can. So he is a dual threat. You have to pay attention to him. I think that'll be the tall task for the Syracuse defense.
You mentioned being a dual threat. Dino Babers was asked earlier in the week about Hudson Card, and he didn't really go that in depth, but he did say that he would be the best quarterback Syracuse has faced so far this season, which is not the highest bar considering the Orange have played Colgate and Western Michigan. But comparing him to Aiden O'Connell, who Syracuse faced last year, and O'Connell had a great game aside from that one bad mistake on the pick six late in the fourth quarter. How do Card and O'Connell compare in terms of play style, in terms of how a defense has to prepare for them?
They're different quarterbacks. O'Connell was a pocket passer. He's not the fastest human in the world, but he had other intangibles that allowed him to succeed. And again, what he was surrounded with is different than what Hudson Card is surrounded with. So they're different quarterbacks. I mean, Hudson's going to get out on the edge. He's going to run the ball. They're going to do a lot of different things with him. Where Aiden O'Connell, it was getting the shotgun, get the snap, go through your progressions, and if you have to run, just run out of bounds, because you're not going to pick up a lot of yards. And he knew that. He knows he knew what his strengths and weaknesses were, and Jeff Brom knew that too. Where Hudson gives you a little bit more of a threat with the running game. I think their arm strengths are equal. But I would just say, if you gave Hudson Card some of the receivers that Purdue had last year, Charlie Jones, I think he would see a lot of success in the passing game. Now, he had a couple passes last week that were open that he missed, and we'll see if that gets corrected this week, if he gets a little bit more in tune with his receivers.
You mentioned Charlie Jones, Payne Durham, big losses from last year to this year. Devin Mockabee, the running back, is back. You mentioned Deion Burks. Who are the guys on Purdue's roster that we should keep an eye on, both in the receiving game and obviously Devin Mockabee coming out of the backfield?
Well, Deion Burks is the number one guy. He was not targeted very much last week, but I attribute that to Virginia Tech paying attention to him after what he did in the first week, where he was targeted 9 times, had an 84-yard catch and run touchdown. Teams are going to pay more attention to him. Tyrone Tracy, since he's transferred to Purdue from Iowa a couple years ago, he's been a running back. He's been a receiver. Now he's technically a running back, but they can get him the ball out of the backfield through the air. He's a guy that can make some plays on the offensive side. TJ Sheffield is a slot receiver who's got a lot of experience, pretty quick, and you can't just ignore him. You can't ignore their receivers, but they just don't have that NFL guy right now that we've used to seeing. Their tight ends, as I mentioned, Garrett Miller, he's their top tight end, but he's coming off an ACL injury from last year. Played a couple snaps against Virginia Tech, and then they held him out once the rains came, and they didn't want to risk that. They haven't used a lot of receivers in the first couple games. They've gone with a pretty small group and just rotated those guys in. I'm curious to see if that continues throughout the year. Defensively, they got a lot of new faces on the defensive line, but they're two linebackers, outside linebackers. Nick Scorton, he went by the name Nick Carraway last year, and then Kydron Jenkins. Those are two guys that have made an impact on the defensive side. I think they've combined for 6.5 tackles for loss. They come off the edge really hard. They complement each other really well. And throughout Purdue's history, when they've had outside linebackers, defensive ends on both sides that play at a high level, they usually have a little bit more success. And they have their freshman safety, Dylan Thieneman. His brothers played at Purdue. They both came as walk-ons several years ago, earned scholarships. Dylan earned his scholarship right out of the gate. He plays a very deep safety position. He is, in my opinion, lining up in the next county when he's back there. But he's got 2 picks this year. He's got a pick, but he's led the team in tackles the first 2 weeks. He's a guy that you have to keep an eye on. Cam Allen, he has 11 career interceptions, so he seems to find himself around the ball. So, and this is Ryan Walters' defense, where they normally play 5 defensive backs. I don't know if it's a 3-5-3 or whatever those weird alignments are, but you see a lot of defensive backs on the field. So that scheme is just kind of getting implemented, and now it'll be game 3, and we'll see what kind of progress they make in that area.
In terms of Walter's defense preparing for Syracuse, someone who had a big game for the Orange last year was wideout Aronde Gadsden, had 2 touchdowns. It was his breakout game, was a preseason second team All-American, but he's doesn't really have a status right now. Tweaked his ankle against Western Michigan last week. Does that make things harder or easier for Purdue to, you think, prepare for on the defensive side, not knowing if Syracuse will have its top offensive weapon in the fold on Saturday?
Well, I think they'll prepare like he's going to play and then go from there. The difference, one of the differences between last year and this year is that Purdue's secondary, outside of Cam Allen and Sanusi Kane, completely new. They don't, the cornerbacks that played last year, Corey Trice, Jamari Brown, the ones that were getting beat down the field, they're no longer with the program. They needed to upgrade that position. They've done that. They haven't had everybody available, but you're going to see a lot of new faces in the secondary and especially at the cornerback position, but they'll prepare like he's going to play and then adjust from there, I think.
Is there a specific area on the Purdue defense that you would, as Syracuse, would look to take advantage of? Obviously, Fresno State scored 39 points. Is there something that they took advantage of in that game that maybe is a weakness on Purdue's defense?
Well, the one thing Purdue has not faced in the first 2 weeks is really a running quarterback. And that's something that, that I think they'll get challenged with this week. So how do they handle that? Because the first 2 quarterbacks were more get the ball out of their hands type of thing. Virginia Tech was more of a pocket passer. The guy from Fresno State could run a little bit, but he chose to stay in the pocket and do it that way. I would say that'll be one of the challenges for Purdue's defense is just being able to deal with a running quarterback, and try to keep them in check. Purdue runs the zone read a lot, and I can't remember for sure if Syracuse runs zone read as much, but I think that'll probably be the top priority for them, is just trying to keep the quarterback from making big plays with his legs.
And we know Garrett Schrader is very much capable of that. So, Mike, on Saturday, I should say, I'm seeing Syracuse. I think the game opened as a pick 'em, and now Syracuse is up to a 2.5-point favorite. Do you think that's a fair line? And how do you see things playing out on Saturday?
Yeah, it's probably a fair line. I mean, pick 'em. I mean, nobody can decide who's a favorite, so they just they put pick 'em there. And then probably more money came in on Syracuse because you look, they're 2-0, Purdue's 1-1. A lot of public bettors don't do a deep dive on teams. They just go with it. They see that Syracuse outscored Colgate and Western Michigan, 1,000,000-7 or whatever it is. Purdue lost a game at home to Fresno State. Whether that's an accurate reflection of the game, I do think it is a toss-up type of game. I do think Syracuse is better than Virginia Tech. I know that's not the highest bar in the world when it comes to ACC football, but I think Syracuse probably brings more to the table than Virginia Tech did. And with the rain last week, that kind of messed up a lot of stuff. I think it'll be a close game. It's a sellout night game at Ross-Ade. As you know, Dino has a history with Purdue. So he's gonna try to come back and get another win in Ross-Ade Stadium. He got a win as the Bowling Green head coach at Ross-Ade Stadium, I think in 2015. So he knows the lay of the land. I think it'll be a very competitive game. I don't think Purdue's in a position really to blow anybody out, but also I don't believe they'll get blown out by a lot of people. I think they're in line to play a lot of close games this year, and I think Saturday will be another one of those.
Dino had glowing things to say about Ross-Ade. I think he may have called it the best playing surface in the country in his press conference on Monday. So I think he's very excited to get back to the Midwest where he coached for so long. Mike, thank you so much for taking some time here on a Wednesday morning before Syracuse and Purdue get going on Saturday. We appreciate you coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out, and you guys have a good rest of the week.